Okay, welcome back. This is Math 980, section 1.4, solving linear equations, which on the very start of this section, these steps are listed out. So I've just written them here so that I don't have to waste time writing them on the board while you guys watch me write them. But they're in the book, they're also right here now. The general idea here is to go through these steps and perform the necessary ones, typically in this order, right? So the first thing that you would do is look, if you have fractions, then you would multiply both sides of the equation by the lowest common denominator to eliminate those fractions. But again, that's not always necessary, and therefore that's why this is listed as necessary, right? Once you've done that, if you've done that, you move on and check to see if you need to distribute anything, right? Take your distribution through, and again, that's if necessary. If there's nothing to distribute, you don't need to do it, right? The next thing then would be to combine like terms on each side. Again, this is as necessary. If you don't have to, you don't have to, right? At that point though, we've reduced it down to something from section 1.3 and 1.2. And you would move all of your variables to one side or the other of the equation, and then move the numbers that don't have variables to the other side. And then isolate the value completely by using the multiplication principle, either multiplying or dividing by whatever's attached to the x to get it by itself. So let's take a look at some examples. I have a few to work through. Let's start here with, let's say, this guy. If I have 3 multiplied by 2x plus 1 plus 5 equals 5 times x minus 3 plus 8. Well, then the very first step was to multiply by the lowest common denominator. I don't have to do that because I have no fractions, right? The second step is to distribute, and I can do that here, and I can do that there. So I'll distribute. This becomes 6x plus 3. Still plus that 5. Distribution over here says I have 5x minus 15, and then still plus that 8. And then I go to the next step, which has to combine like terms. I have like terms that I can combine. So this gives me 6x plus 8 is equal to 5x. And on the other side here, I've got negative 15 that I can combine with 8. That gives me minus 7. The next step after that says to move the variables to one side. So I'm going to move all of my variables to the left-hand side by subtracting 5x. And at the same time, I'm going to move my non-variable term to the right-hand side. So I'll subtract 8. Okay. That leaves me with just an x equals negative 15. And the next step would be to isolate the x completely by using the multiplication principle. But it's a 1, so I don't have to. I'm done. That's it. Let's take a look at another one. Let's look at say this one. 2 times x plus 3 plus 1 is equal to negative 3 times 4x minus 1 and then plus 8. Okay. So let's see. Again, there's no fractions, so I don't have to worry about the lowest common denominator. So I'll start right in with the distribution, right? And as I go through these, I'll start going a little bit faster and faster because I don't have to explain those 6 steps anymore. By the way, number 6 I've completely skipped. You should check your solutions. I'll leave that to you guys. I've got 2x plus 6 plus 1 more is equal to, and when you distribute a negative, make sure you take that negative with it. That becomes negative 12x. Negative times the negative is a positive, so plus 3 and then plus 8. Combining my like terms on the left side gives me 2x plus 7. And combining my like terms on the right hand side gives me negative 12x plus 11. I'm going to pull all of my x terms to the left by adding 12x. And get my 7 off to the other side by subtracting it. This gives me 14x on the left hand side equals 4 on the right hand side, right? And if I divide each side by 14, I can simplify the right hand side. They're both divisible by 2, so that leaves me with 2 over 7, and I'm done. Good. All right. If you need to pause, right, pause this, write it down, but I will move on to the next problem here. My next problem says I have x over 4 minus 1 over 8 equals x over 2 minus 3 over 4. Okay. Now I have to worry about step 1. Right? Step 1 is to multiply everything by the lowest common denominator, and that lowest common denominator is 8. So I want to multiply everything by 8, and I'll multiply that by, if you think of it, maybe the fraction 8 over 1. Some people like to look at it that way. But I'm going to multiply the left-hand side by 8 over 1, and that gets distributed to every term. And I'll multiply the right-hand side by 8 over 1, and that gets distributed to every term. So I can simplify, because 8 and 4 are both divisible by 4, but that leaves me with a 2. So I have x times 2, which is 2x. 8 and 8 simplify here, but they leave 1s. And so that's 1 over 1, which is just 1. So it's minus still the 1. Equals, the 8 and the 2 simplify, leaving me with a 4, so I have x times 4, which is 4x, minus, and then the 8 and the 4 are both divisible by 4, leaving me with a 2, so I have 3 times 2, which is 6. And now I have no more fractions. That's the nice part of step 1, is it'll eliminate these fractions. I want to get all of my x terms to one side, but since I have a 2x here and a 4x here, they'll be positive if I push them to the right-hand side. So I'm going to do that just to avoid a negative. You don't have to. You can pull them to the left and deal with a negative. It doesn't matter. But I'll subtract 2x from both sides to get them to the right. Since my x terms are going to the right, I want this 6 out of the right and to the left. So I'll add 6 to both sides. And that gives me 5 on the left is equal to 2x on the right. Then the very last step says divide each side by 2, and I'm done. My final answer is 5/2. Alright, let's take a look at this next one here. The next one, I have a fraction on the outside of a parentheses. 1/3 times x plus 1 is equal to 2/3 x minus 1/9. So step 1 is to multiply by that lowest common denominator, and that lowest common denominator is 9. Right? So I have to multiply everything but not by 9, but I have to be careful here, because this whole left-hand side is all one product, but one of the things in the product has a sum. So it's easy to get confused here, but this is all essentially one term, and therefore when I multiply my 9, I only have to multiply it here, right? If I multiply it on the outside, it gets distributed to both, I don't have to multiply it outside and inside because I'm doubling up what I'm doing. Multiplying it by the outside by a 9 and on the inside by a 9 is essentially multiplying the left by an 81, right? And I don't want that. So just multiply the left-hand side, this whole product will get it. On the right-hand side, since this is a term and that's a term, then I do have to distribute it. So I'm going to multiply it by 9 over 1 on both terms, right? But again, the left-hand side only gets the 1 because it's all one big term, right? If I simplify, 9 and 3 simplifies to 3, so I have a 3 on the outside of my x plus 1. The 9 and the 3 simplify to give me a 3 here, so 3 times 2 times x is 6x. And then minus, again the 9 and the 9 cancel, but they don't disappear, that's minus a 1 in the end, right? The other way to deal with this is to distribute first. You're free to do that. You can take the 1/3, distribute it, and then just multiply all of the terms by 9. But it doesn't matter. Whichever one you choose, just be careful how many times you multiply the 9 in. Now I'll distribute, giving me 3x plus 3. There's no like terms to combine here, so I don't have to worry about that. I'm just going to start moving my x's to one side. Move them all to the right, while adding 1, giving me 4 equals 3x. And then that last step, the fifth step, is to divide here by 3, and I get x equals 4/3. A lot of mathematicians hate to do step 6. I'm included with that, checking your work. We just like to say we're right, and if we're wrong, then it was somebody else's fault, or the problem's fault, or whatever. But, you know, you should check these. It's nice to check them once in a while to make sure that you're doing it right. All right. Let's take a look at one last type of question here. Let's look at 1 over x minus 3. Equals 2 over x plus 3. Now the lowest common denominator here is not easy. It has to have a factor of x minus 3, and it has to have a factor of x plus 3, right? So what I'm going to do is multiply the right-hand side and the left-hand side by both of those factors, x minus 3 and x plus 3. And that is indeed my lowest common denominator. So this gets multiplied. But you can see here, on the right-hand side, the factor of x plus 3 cancels the factor of x plus 3, and that leaves me with just a 2 multiplied by an x minus 3. On the left-hand side, the x minus 3 cancels the x minus 3, and that leaves me with a factor of 1 times x plus 3. So the fractions are gone. If I distribute, the 1 doesn't change anything. I end up with x plus 3. And on the right, 2x minus 6. I'm going to combine x terms, get the x to the right again, and add the 6 to get them to the left. This gives me 9 on the left equals 2x minus x is just x, so I don't have to take that fifth step. I'm done with x equals 9. Right? In the step 6, you'll want to check your answers, because if I had gotten something like 3 or negative 3, I would see that I would be dividing by 0, and this wouldn't have worked, right? I didn't, I got a 9, so it does work, so I'm good to go, right? But you do have to be careful, especially when you have stuff like this. We'll get to that later on a little bit more in depth. But it is possible to come up with an answer that doesn't work because of the that first step that we took. Okay, so that's it for 1.4, I think. That should cover it. Try your homework, post your stuff to the discussion boards, and I'll see you for 1.5.